The marketplace was quiet, the kind of quiet that made the air feel heavy, like something bad was about to happen. It was a strange place, full of broken things, discarded memories, and unwanted lives. Alien traders sold their wares with eyes that were tired and empty, their faces worn from years of struggling in a galaxy that didn't care. Among the stalls, where the smell of rotting food and metals mixed, there was a cage. A small metal cage, standing alone in the middle of the market. Inside it, a girl sat. She was unlike anything most of the people around here had ever seen. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, her long hair tangled with dirt and grime. Her eyes, though, were the worst part. They were full of something no one expected to see in someone who had been thrown away like trash hope. The hope in her eyes flickered like a tiny flame in the dark, struggling to stay alive. She was chained to the bars of the cage, her hands bound with thick metal that rubbed against her wrists, leaving marks. Her feet were bare, the ground beneath her unforgiving and cold. She hadn't eaten in days, maybe even longer, and her stomach growled loudly in protest. The pain from hunger twisted in her insides, but it was nothing compared to the bruises all over her body, marks of the cruel treatment she'd endured. She had been left here to rot, to be forgotten by the world. The traders didn't care. The crowds that passed by didn't care. No one even looked at her, except for one person, a human. He stood at the edge of the marketplace, his dark eyes scanning the area, looking for something, anything, to make sense of this place. His uniform was a deep, dark-color military, but it was clear he wasn't here for a fight. He wasn't here for anything violent. He was just a man lost in a world that wasn't his, in a place he didn't understand. He had heard rumors of strange markets, where things were sold that shouldn't be, but nothing prepared him for what he was about to see. As his gaze swept across the crowd, it landed on the cage. And then, everything else faded into the background. The alien girl's eyes met his, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Her breath hitched. She was so used to being ignored that it took her a second to realize someone was looking at her, really looking at her. He didn't seem like the others. The other humans who had passed by, those who had mocked her, spit at her, or just kept walking without a second glance. No, this man was different. He didn't laugh, he didn't turn away, he didn't look disgusted. Instead, he walked closer, slow, cautious steps. She wondered if this was it. If he was just going to stand there, stare at her, and then walk away like everyone else. But he didn't. He stopped in front of the cage, his face serious, but not unkind. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The alien girl's heart thudded loudly in her chest, and she couldn't decide if it was fear or hope that made her pulse race. She had been treated like nothing for so long that when someone finally looked at her, it felt like a dream. A strange, impossible dream. The human bent down and looked her over. He didn't seem afraid of her, and she wasn't sure if she should feel relieved or more terrified. In his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: recognition. Not of what she was, but of who she might be. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, but there was something in it that made her believe he actually wanted to know. It was such a simple question, but in that moment, it felt like the world had shifted. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him everything, all the terrible things that had happened to her, but her voice felt too weak. She had no words left. All she had was a silent plea in her eyes, begging for help, begging for someone to finally see her, to understand that she was still alive, still fighting, still hoping for something better. The human stood up straight, looking around the market as if searching for something. She thought he might just turn away, leave her here like everyone else. But he didn't. Instead, he turned to the trader who owned the cage and raised his hand. "How much?" The human's voice was firm, not giving any hint of hesitation. The trader, an alien with a cruel smile, eyed him up and down before laughing. "Her," he sneered. "She's worthless. Look at her. Broken, No one will ever buy her, not even for a few credits. The human didn't flinch. He didn't care about the trader's words. He just stared at the girl in the cage, and for the first time in a long time, he made a decision. A decision that would change everything. "I'll take her," the human said. The trader's smile faded, and he stared at the human, sizing him up. "You're serious?" "I don't care what you think she's worth," the human said, his voice steady. "I'll pay whatever it takes." The alien girl's breath caught in her throat. She had heard humans say things like that before, but it had never meant anything. But this time, something in his eyes told her that he wasn't like the others. This time, he wasn't going to leave her here to die. The trader grumbled, muttered something under his breath, and agreed to the deal. The human reached into his pouch and pulled out a handful of credits, more than the trader had ever expected to get. With a sharp motion, the cage door was opened. The human reached out to her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe. This man, this human, wasn't like the rest. He had seen her when no one else had. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one to save her. The cage door creaked as it swung open, its rusty hinges groaning like an old man in pain. The alien girl blinked, her vision still blurry from days of neglect and exhaustion. The sunlight seemed too bright after the darkness of the cage, and for a moment she couldn't tell if she was dreaming. But she wasn't dreaming. A human stood before her, his dark eyes steady and unwavering, looking at her with something other than pity. No one had looked at her like this before. Everyone had either ignored her or treated her like a piece of garbage. But this man, he wasn't like the others. He hadn't turned away or made fun of her. She cautiously stood, her legs unsteady. Beneath her, she felt weak, every step a battle, but she forced herself to face him. "Are you real?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The human said nothing. Instead, he stretched out his hand, the same hand that had offered a moment of kindness when no one else would. She flinched slightly, not used to any touch that wasn't cruel or cold, but something in her wanted to trust him. Before she could take a step forward, the trader who had owned the cage approached with a mocking laugh. Well, looks like someone's got a soft spot," he sneered. The alien girl stiffened, her eyes darting to the trader. She had no intention of letting this man control her any longer, but she also knew she had no strength to fight him. The human stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he turned to face the trader. His voice, though calm, carried an authority that seemed to challenge the very air around them. "How much?" The trader's laugh was cruel. "You must be crazy," he scoffed. "She's a broken thing. Her value's not worth a single credit." The human didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his voice low but filled with a quiet resolve. "I'll pay for her," he said. "Name your price." The trader's eyes widened, the shock fleeting before his greedy smile returned. He rubbed his hands together like he had just won a lottery, his mind calculating how much he could squeeze out of this foolish human. 500 credits, he said, the number spilling from his lips with ease. A fair price for a useless slave. The alien girl's stomach churned. 500 credits? Was she really worth that little in this world? The price was a slap to her dignity, a reminder of just how far she had fallen. But the human didn't hesitate. He didn't question the amount, didn't bargain. Instead, he reached into his pouch and pulled out the credits, the exact amount the trader had demanded. The human handed them over, and for a moment, the trader stared at the money, then at the human, almost in disbelief. The alien girl's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. No one had ever treated her like a person, let alone paid for her. She was just an object to be discarded, a broken toy thrown away when it no longer worked. But this man, he was buying her freedom. She couldn't believe it. The trader took the money without a second thought, his hands shaking with greed. As he pocketed the credits, "She's yours now," the trader muttered, already looking for his next target. You'd better be careful with her. She's got nothing left but her anger." The human didn't respond to the warning. He simply turned to the girl, his eyes soft yet determined. "Come with me," he said, his voice like a lifeline thrown into the stormy sea of her life. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door of the cage, the first real contact with the outside world in what felt like forever. But she hesitated, fear gnawing at her insides. What if this was a mistake? What if he was just like everyone else, using her for his own gain? Before she could voice her doubts, the human spoke again, his words steady and unwavering. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." Something in his voice softened the sharp edges of her fear. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she allowed herself to believe him. As she stepped out of the cage, her legs were shaky, but she felt a strange sense of freedom wash over her. The cage that had held her prisoner for so long was now behind her, and the human man was standing in front of her, guiding her towards something better. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, still uncertain, still afraid. The human glanced at her with a soft smile. "Anywhere you want. It's your choice now." The alien girl looked at him, her heart beating faster. She had spent so long surviving, but now, for the first time, she had a choice. A choice to trust him, to follow him into the unknown. Her journey wasn't over, but maybe, just maybe, it was about to begin again. The stars above were brighter than the alien girl had ever seen. She had forgotten the beauty of the night sky, lost somewhere in the cage, buried beneath the cold metal and even colder indifference of the world. But now, standing on the open ground beside the human, she felt the vastness of space in a way she hadn't before. It wasn't just the stars, though. It was the feeling of freedom, the first taste of air that wasn't tainted with the stench of rot or desperation. The human led her away from the bustling market, away from the traders and the noise, into a quiet, peaceful place where the sounds of life seemed distant and muffled. There were no eyes watching her here, no judgment, no cruelty. Just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind and the gentle hum of the night around them. Her feet, bare and sore from the long walk, made soft sounds on the dirt path. It was strange, almost surreal. She hadn't felt grass beneath her feet since she was a child, and now it felt like the world was waking up again. They reached a small camp a little way into the trees, just beyond the edge of the settlement. The human didn't speak much as he set up a small fire, the glow from the flames dancing across his face. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent many nights alone, yet there was a tenderness in the way he prepared the camp, as if he had never shared a moment like this with anyone before. The alien girl sat down beside the fire, rapping, her arms around her knees. She didn't know what to say. The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She had spent so much time in the chaos of the cage, surrounded by people who only saw her as a thing, that this stillness was almost a foreign concept. It was peaceful, yet it made her restless. The human, seeing her discomfort, turned to her with a gentle expression. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. She nodded slowly, her stomach a constant reminder of how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. She didn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything that didn't make her stomach ache in pain. Without another word, the human pulled out a small ration pack, tearing it open and offering it to her. "It's not much," he said with a small smile, "but it'll help." She took it from him, her hands shaking slightly. She hadn't realized how much she missed eating something warm, something that didn't taste like despair. As she ate, her eyes remained on him, watching his every move. He was so different from the others. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He wasn't treating her like an object, like she was just another slave to be used and discarded. "Why are you doing this?" The words slipped from her mouth before she could stop them, the question she had been asking herself ever since he stepped forward in the marketplace. The human paused for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. His gaze softened as he looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable, yet there was something raw in them, something honest. "Because you deserve better," he said simply. There was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of doubt. She didn't know how to respond to that. She had lived her life in cages, literal and metaphorical, had been told she was worthless. A burden. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered before. The simplicity of his words left her stunned. He wasn't offering her empty promises or words laced with pity. He was offering her something real, something she didn't know how to accept. She opened her mouth to speak but paused, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had never been this close to a human before, never allowed herself to think that anyone would truly care. What if he was just another trap? What if she was just another thing to him? But his gaze didn't falter. There was something steady in the way he looked at her, something that told her she wasn't just another broken thing to fix. She was a person. And maybe, just maybe, she could believe that for the first time. The fire crackled between them, its warmth reaching her, not just from the flames but from the human's presence. She felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance, and she wondered if this was what it meant to feel safe. As the night wore on, the human spoke little, but his presence filled the space between them, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. He set up a small sleeping area for her, giving her the privacy she hadn't known in what felt like forever. No one had ever treated her with such consideration, such care. She lay down beneath the stars, her body exhausted, but her mind racing. The human, though he had given her a new chance at life, had only given her part of it. She still had so many questions, so many doubts. But for the first time in years, she felt the strange pull of hope deep in her chest. It was fragile, like a flower growing in the cracks of the pavement, but it was there. And that was more than she had ever dared to wish for. As the fire's glow faded and the night grew deeper, she closed her eyes, listening to the sound of his breathing nearby. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. The morning sun was weak, casting pale light through the thick canopy of trees above. The alien girl woke up, blinking against the soft rays that filtered through the branches. She lay still for a moment, not daring to move, unsure whether it was all a dream. The night had been so strange, so full of unfamiliar comforts, that it almost felt like she was still locked away in her old cage, trapped in a fantasy where kindness was nothing more than a cruel trick. But no, she was awake. She was free. The human had not left her side throughout the night, sitting by the fire until he too had fallen asleep. He was still asleep now, curled up on the ground near the fire, his breath slow and even. She studied him for a moment. There was something deeply peaceful about the way he looked, vulnerable, even. He didn't seem like the hardened soldiers she had heard about, those who were only out for their own survival. He seemed human in the truest sense. But what did that really mean? And why had he done this for her? She couldn't help herself, her curiosity burned within her. She needed to know. She rose slowly, careful not to wake him. Her legs were still sore, but the feeling of the earth beneath her feet felt grounding. She could still hardly believe she was here, in this strange place. The human had given her a chance, but she wasn't sure she could trust him completely yet. After all, this was the first time someone had looked at her with something other than contempt. Her hand reached for her tattered clothes, pulling them tighter around herself as if they could shield her from the questions she didn't yet have answers to. As she moved away from the campfire, the weight of her past crept back into her thoughts. It always did, like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The memories were painful, like scars that wouldn't heal. It felt impossible to escape the fear that had been drilled into her since she was a child. The fear that no matter how far she ran, the chains would always catch up with her. She wasn't supposed to have hope. She wasn't supposed to believe that something better existed. But there she was, standing on the edge of a forest, free, with no idea what to do next. Her thoughts were interrupted when the human stirred. In his sleep, a quiet groan escaping his lips. She froze, afraid he would wake up and see her vulnerability. But he just turned over, his face softening, and fell back into a deeper slumber. Relief washed over her. But the weight of her past was still there, haunting her, whispering to her that she wasn't worthy of any of this. She had to know why. Had he helped her? Why her? As if hearing her unspoken question, the human's eyes fluttered open. He stared at her for a long moment, as though still unsure if she was real, before sitting up, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Morning," he said simply, his voice rough from sleep, but warm. She nodded, unsure what to say. She opened her mouth but closed it again, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. How could she explain the chaos inside her, the conflicting emotions that tore at her heart? How could she make him understand the weight of the secrets she carried, the horrors she had endured? The human didn't push her. He simply stood, stretched, and then moved to the edge of the camp, pulling out some kind of rations. "You're probably starving," he said with a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He set the rations down beside her, but his gaze lingered on her face, as if trying to read the depths of her thoughts. She hesitated, her eyes darting between the food and him. "I haven't eaten in. I don't remember," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "Not properly, not in a long time." The human nodded, his face softening. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he sat next to her and broke the silence that hung heavily between them. "I know. I figured you hadn't eaten. You looked broken when I found you." Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't pull away. "What made you help me?" she asked, the question finally spilling out. "Everyone else just walked past me. No one even cared. But you, why?" The human's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something she couldn't place crossing his face. He took a deep breath, then turned his eyes toward the fire. "It's not about who you are," he said slowly. "It's about what you deserve." He glanced at her then, meeting her eyes. "You deserve a chance to be more than just a prisoner, a thing to be thrown away." She was silent, unsure how to respond. His words felt both comforting and overwhelming, and she found herself torn between disbelief and a growing warmth. "But what about me?" she whispered. "What if I'm not worth saving? What if I'm just broken? A thing that doesn't belong anywhere?" He shook his head, his eyes unwavering. "No one is beyond saving. You're more than your scars, more than what others have done to you. I see you for what you are now, a person, not an object. And that's all that matters." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. The alien girl's chest tightened. She had spent so long thinking of herself as nothing but a tool, a body, a slave to be used. But here he was, a human, telling her she was something more. She didn't know if she could believe him, but she wanted to. "You're not what you've been through," he added, his voice softer now. "And you don't have to carry that burden alone anymore." She swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in her throat. She had never heard such kindness, such honesty. It made something deep inside her stir, something fragile but real. For the first time, she didn't feel like a monster, a thing with no future. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. Maybe, for the first time, she could have something worth fighting for. The air was thick with tension, a silent hum that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of everything. The alien girl stared at the human in front of her, his face set with determination as he gathered the few belongings they had. Some rations. A small pack, a map that seemed almost useless in the vast unknown. There was no guarantee of success, no assurance that they would escape unscathed. But there was something in the air that morning, something that felt different. It was the first time in years, perhaps her entire life, that she could remember a spark of hope kindling inside her. She had no idea how to trust this feeling, how to trust him, but the way he looked at her, like she was a person, not just an object, made it hard to deny. "We have to go," the human said, his voice low but steady. He glanced at the sky, squinting as if reading the wind. "They'll come for you sooner or later. If we stay here much longer, we'll be caught. I don't want to risk it." She nodded slowly, but inside, she felt her heart race with doubt. Every fiber of her being screamed to stay hidden, to curl up and remain in this small, quiet camp where, at least for a moment, there was peace. But that was the trap, wasn't it? She couldn't stay hidden forever. And she couldn't keep running from what she was, what she had become. The human had spoken of freedom, of choice, but she still didn't know how to make that choice. "What if we're not ready?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the trees. "What if we can't escape?" The human turned to her, his eyes filled with understanding, but also something else, determination. It was the kind of look that came from someone who had seen enough of the world's darkness to know that running away from it wouldn't work. He had to fight, and he was ready for that fight, even if it meant risking everything. "We don't have a choice," he said, his voice firm. "I won't leave you behind, and I won't let them take you again. We'll do this together." Her stomach twisted as he spoke. She had never known someone to be so sure of their actions. In all the years she had lived, there had never been a promise like that, never a person who would stand beside her, no matter the cost. She didn't know if she could trust him, but for the first time, she wanted to. It was a feeling she didn't know how to handle. It was raw, overwhelming, and terrifying. "We'll need to move quickly," the human said, breaking through her spiral of thoughts. "I've mapped out our route to the mountains. It's the best place to hide, at least for now. But it's not safe. There are things out there, other creatures, other dangers, but we can handle it. I know we can." Her eyes flickered to the forest around them, to the vast unknown that lay beyond their camp. The mountains he spoke of felt like a distant dream. She didn't know if they could make it. She didn't even know if she was strong enough to follow him. She had spent so long surviving on scraps, her body and spirit both battered, that the idea of running felt almost like a fantasy. "What if I can't keep up?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. The human took a step closer, his eyes softening, as though he could read the fear that gripped her heart. "You won't be alone," he said, his voice low but full of conviction. "I'll be with you every step of the way." He extended his hand again, offering it not just as a gesture of help, but as a promise, a lifeline she didn't know how to grasp. The alien girl stared at his hand, her breath catching in her throat. She had never been touched with kindness, never had someone offer to help her without expecting something in return. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The trees around them stood still, as though waiting for her to make a choice that would determine whether she lived or died, whether she remained a prisoner to her past, or stepped into a future she could never have imagined. Taking a deep breath, she reached out, her trembling fingers brushing against his. "Together," she whispered, the word foreign and fragile on her lips. The human nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Together," he repeated. And just like that, the plan was set. There was no turning back. As they began to gather the rest of their things, the weight of their journey ahead settled on her shoulders. She didn't know what awaited them on the path, or whether they would succeed. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. There was someone beside her, someone who believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the courage to face it. The air was thick with the promise of danger. As they moved deeper into the dense forest, the weight of their decision settled on both of them. They had been on the road for hours, their steps careful, their eyes scanning every shadow, every rustling leaf. The mountains in the distance loomed like an unreachable goal, but they kept moving forward, step by cautious step. The alien girl could hear her heartbeat in her ears, the thudding rhythm like a warning, a reminder that time was running out. They couldn't afford to be seen. They couldn't afford to fail. "Are we close?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. The human, walking a few paces ahead, paused and glanced over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his jaw was clear. "Not yet. We're still a few miles from the foothills," he said. "We have to keep moving. Stay low." The alien girl nodded, but inside, her thoughts churned with doubt. What if they weren't quick enough? What if they were caught before they could escape? She had spent so many years being used, so many years running from one cage to another, that the idea of real freedom felt like something out of reach. But the human believed in it. He believed in her. A sudden rustle in the bushes snapped her out of her thoughts. Her breath caught in her throat, and she froze, instinctively reaching for the small weapon the human had given her earlier, a crude knife, barely useful but all they had. The human's hand shot up, signaling for her to stay still. His eyes were scanning the forest, his posture rigid. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "We're not alone." Her pulse quickened as she strained her ears, listening for the sounds of movement. The wind carried strange scents, unfamiliar noises that set her on edge. She felt the weight of the alien world pressing in on her, and the forest, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a trap. Then she saw them. Emerging from the trees like shadows were figures. Tall, heavily armored, their faces obscured by dark helmets. They moved with an unnatural precision, scanning the area around them as if they knew exactly where to look. Her stomach twisted in fear. These weren't just traitors. These weren't just ordinary enemies. These were soldiers hunting them. The human had been right. The world had not forgotten her. The alien girl's breath caught in her throat as she glanced at the human. He was already moving, his hand gripping hers, pulling her towards the underbrush. "We need to go now," he whispered urgently, his eyes flickering with determination. "Stay close to me." They ran. The forest was thick, the underbrush grabbing at their legs, but they kept going, dodging between trees, pushing forward. Her breath came in short gasps, her muscles burning, but she couldn't stop. The soldiers were gaining on them. Every time she heard a snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes, her heart raced faster. The human was fast, always just a step ahead, guiding her through the trees with an ease that made her wonder how long he had been on the run. But the soldiers weren't far behind. The first shot rang out like thunder. The alien girl felt a sharp pain in her side, the force of the bullet grazing her skin. She stumbled but kept running. Her body screamed at her to stop, to give in. But she couldn't, not when she was so close to escaping everything she had ever known. "Keep moving," the human shouted, turning to fire back at their pursuers, his aim quick and deadly. He wasn't just running anymore, he was fighting for her, for both of them. She glanced over her shoulder and for a brief second saw one of the soldiers fall, the others scrambling to regroup. But there were more. There would always be more. They broke through the tree line, the foothills now in sight. The human pushed forward, urging her faster. "We're almost there," he shouted. But just as they were about to reach the first ridge, a sound sharp and loud filled the air. It was a sound she recognized only too well, the hum of an energy weapon charging. She spun around just in time to see the soldier aiming the weapon at them. "Move!" the human yelled, diving toward her and knocking her out of the line of fire. The shot missed, but the explosion of energy sent them both tumbling. Dirt and debris rained down around them as they hit the ground. The alien girl's head spun, her vision swimming as she struggled to get back on her feet. The human was already standing, dragging her up with a strength she hadn't expected. "Keep moving, we don't have much time," he growled, urgency in his voice. They ran again, their bodies bruised and battered, but their resolve stronger than ever. The soldiers were relentless, but so were they. The mountain was in sight, and with every step, they drew closer to a future that was just beginning to take shape. The human led the way, and though the alien girl's legs burned with exhaustion, she kept going, trusting him, trusting herself. Freedom was within reach, but the fight wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. And as the soldiers' footsteps grew louder behind them, she knew that no matter what happened, they would fight for it. Together. The sound of the wind howling through the jagged mountain peaks was the only thing that filled the air as the human and the alien girl pressed forward, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. They had made it. Against all odds, they had reached the foothills. But even here, in the relative safety of the mountains, they couldn't escape the feeling that danger was never far behind. The world around them was breathtaking, immense, wild and unforgiving, but the alien girl couldn't enjoy the view. She was too tired, too terrified. The air was thin, the climb steep, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. The human, however, was unwavering. He was the one leading them now, his steps sure and steady as he navigated the rocky path. His eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now burned with a quiet determination. He had kept his promise, he had brought her this far. But she knew the hardest part was yet to come. "Are we safe here?" she asked, her voice trembling from both fear and fatigue. The human didn't answer right away. He paused, looking at the rough terrain ahead, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to her, his eyes softening with an almost unspoken reassurance. "We're safer than we were," he said, "but we can't stop yet. We need to get higher, further from their reach. This isn't over." The alien girl nodded, but the weight of the words pressed down on her. She didn't want to keep running. She didn't want to fight anymore. She wanted to rest. She wanted to forget the fear, the pain, the cage, the chains, the soldiers, the whole damn universe that had never given her a chance, but she couldn't. Not yet. They continued their climb, each step harder than the last. The peaks loomed above them, silent and imposing, like ancient sentinels watching over them. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her legs burning with each movement, but she didn't dare stop. She couldn't afford to. And then, just as she thought she couldn't go any further, they reached a small clearing on the side of the mountain. The view was breathtaking, endless stretches of land that seemed to go on forever, the world sprawling out beneath them like a canvas of untamed beauty. But it wasn't the view that stopped her, it was the human. He had stopped walking. His back was to her, and he was staring out into the distance, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. He didn't look like the man who had led her here. He looked like someone else, someone who was about to make a decision that would change everything. Alien girl stood still, watching him. She wasn't sure what to say, or even what she was feeling. But something deep inside her told her this was the moment when everything would come to a head. "I can't do this anymore," the human said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper, carried by the wind. "I promised you that I'd get you to safety, but I can't promise what happens next. I'm not a hero. I'm just a soldier, and there's a price for freedom. I knew that when I started this." The alien girl's heart twisted in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small, as if afraid of hearing the answer. "I mean that they won't stop coming for you," he said. "For both of us. They'll keep hunting us down, no matter where we go, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting, to keep protecting you. I've already lost so much." The alien girl's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him that he wasn't alone, that she would fight with him, but the words felt useless. She couldn't protect him, either. She couldn't even protect herself. She took a hesitant step forward, her hands shaking as she reached out to him. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you fight this battle by yourself. We can't do it alone, but together. Maybe we can." The human turned slowly, meeting her eyes. For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence between them speaking volumes. Then, as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders, he nodded. "I never thought I'd hear someone say that to me," he said, his voice soft. "But you're right, we're in this together now." For the first time since they had begun their journey, the alien girl felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just hope, it was strength. The kind of strength that comes from standing beside someone who truly believes in you. Someone who is willing to fight for you, even when everything else seems impossible. "Then let's make it count," she said, her voice stronger now, more certain. The human smiled. The first real smile she had seen from him since they'd met. It wasn't a smile of triumph, not yet, but it was a smile of resolve. "We will." As they sat down together on the rocky ground, the wind sweeping through the mountains, the alien girl finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better. She didn't know what the future held, or if they would ever truly be safe. But in that moment, with the human by her side, she realized that maybe freedom wasn't just a place, it was something you carried with you, no matter where you went. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. They were free. For now, that was enough.